Thank you, everyone, for being here on this gloomy Wednesday morning. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. I put this in the chat for everyone to see, but please know that we will be taking questions and answers at the end of this presentation. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box. With that, I will hand things over to CCE's Policy Director, Tracy Lasquez.
Thanks, Marissa. Can folks hear me okay? Great. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. The Council for Court Excellence, or CCE, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization whose mission is to improve and make more equitable DC's justice system. And thanks for joining us on this briefing of our new report, Is DC More Secure? A Criminal Legal System Overview. First, some background about the report. This is the fourth annual landscape of the criminal legal system that's provided data that helps folks understand the district's criminal legal system landscape and also identifies those who are most impacted by DC's justice systems. This work was made possible with the generous support of the Public Welfare Foundation. As many of you know, in March 2024, concerns about the increase in homicides and other violent crime led to the passage of permanent legislation, the Secure DC Omnibus Amendment Act of 2024, which has generally been called Secure DC. So in addition to some basic information on justice system trends, such as adult and youth crime and incarceration, this report highlights several aspects of Secure DC and provides data analyses that can be used as a baseline with which to benchmark changes in crime and incarceration that may be related to the law's provisions. As such, this report looks a little different from previous iterations. First, those who've seen our past reports will notice right away that it is shorter and more focused on data and graphics. And this is thanks to feedback from the community gathered by a team of researchers at American University. And it focuses on key Secure DC provisions of crime and policing, the courts, incarceration, youth justice, and reentry. I will now pass it to Katie, Policy Counsel at CCE, to dig in.
Good morning. So to frame our discussion about the criminal legal system, it's important to look at the disparities in race and sex that appear across DC's criminal legal landscape. As shown in the bar graph, Black people are more likely to be arrested, be in a secure youth facility, or be in a jail or prison in DC than their peers. In 2023, the share of Black people arrested and incarcerated in DC or the Federal Bureau of Prisons, BOP facilities, was roughly double their respective share than in the general DC population. What's more, the impacts of direct involvement in DC's justice system are heavily concentrated on men. While women make up a little over half of DC's population, about 1 in 4 adults and youth arrested by the Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, in 2023 were women. Unfortunately, data is not available by race and sex for jail or prison populations, so it is not known whether racial disparities differ between sexes. While women are underrepresented in terms of overall arrests, in 2023, there were almost 3 times as many arrests of Black women in DC as there were of white men. Looking at policing in DC specifically, MPD also both stops and uses force against Black individuals more often than others in the district, as shown by the pie charts examining the racial composition of stops made by MPD in 2023 and the racial composition of MPD use of force incidents in 2022. This suggests Black individuals are more likely to be policed and thus become involved in the criminal legal system in DC. Turning to trends in crime, overall crime in DC has decreased compared to 10 years ago. We analyzed violent crime data from MPD over a 10-year period, focusing on homicide, sexual abuse, assault with a dangerous weapon, and robbery. Of these, the only offense that has seen an increase compared to 2013 is homicides. And as we zoom into that 10-year downward trend in crime, we see a slight rise from 2022 to 2023 in both property crimes and violent crimes, returning to pre-pandemic crime levels. This slight rise in homicides and robberies since 2022 were drivers of both public scrutiny and new legislation, including the Secure DC bill. While certain categories of crime are up since 2022, there was also a serious decrease in arrests during the pandemic, and arrest numbers have remained low in the years since. And despite crime falling overall and homicides rising, and in 2023, it was the lowest it has been in a decade at 52%. And at the same time that MPD's homicide clearance rate is at an all-time low, the costs of policing and incarceration are at an all-time high in the district. In 2023, MPD officers also worked over 1.1 million hours of overtime at an estimated cost of over $80 million. When we dig into crime data by ward, we see that victimization reported to the police is not equally distributed across the district. As shown in the bar graph, this is particularly true of violent crime. For example, the homicide rate in Ward 8 was 50 times that of Ward 3. The rates of assault with a dangerous weapon were also disproportionately higher in Wards 7 and 8 compared to any other ward. The impact of violent crime is disproportionately felt by Black and low-income communities in the district. Ward 3, which has the lowest homicide rate, is comprised of 68% white residents with a median income of about $148,000. By contrast, Ward 8, which has the highest homicide rate, has a median income of about $46,000 and its residents are 88% Black. The criminal legal system impacts tens of thousands of people in the district each year, and the impact of crime extends far beyond arrest. For this report, we examined the most recent population estimates for the number of DC residents incarcerated or under correctional supervision, collectively referred to as being under correctional control. As displayed in the pie chart, data from September 30th, 2023 and later shows that about 20,000 people in DC are under correctional control on an average day, a number which is lower than the total number of individuals who may have been under correctional control throughout the year. About 3 in 4 individuals in DC are on some type of community supervision, with about a quarter incarcerated in a locked facility. Given DC's current population of about 670,000 people, this means 3% of the DC's population and 3.5% of adults are under some form of correctional control overall in the district. And among those under correctional control, the Black community is disproportionately represented. About 6.5% of Black adults are incarcerated or under community supervision. This means the collateral consequences also fall most heavily on the district's Black residents. I'll now pass my virtual mic to Morgan Grizzle, our Open Horizons Criminal Justice Fellow, to discuss youth justice.
Thanks, Katie. So, a provision of Security C increased pretrial detention and penalties, including for youth, for a variety of offenses, including firearm possession, carjacking, assault with intent, and more. Youth arrest trends over the past 8 years show a sharp decline in arrests during 2020 and 2023, although arrests remained below pre-pandemic levels. And in 2023, over 2,600 youth were in a facility or on probation, with significant racial disparities for Black boys. Research shows that just the act of being arrested increases a young person's likelihood of future legal system involvement. Nationally, there is growing support for diverting youth who come to the attention of law enforcement. While DC is expanding the use of incarceration for some youth, the juvenile justice diversion programs currently operating in the district all show low rearrest rates for program participants. Now, we'll walk through a few provisions from Security C and the potential effects on public safety, incarceration, and other stages of our criminal legal system. Because data is not yet available on the impacts of many of these provisions, we hope to set a foundation of statistics to track for when they do become available. And we'll begin with pretrial detention. Many individuals are incarcerated while awaiting trial, and it's important to remember that these individuals remain innocent until proven guilty. Security C expanded the court system's ability to hold people in pretrial detention by adding additional categories of crimes that trigger a rebuttable presumption of pretrial detention. Security C also added language that will require judges to do more work by creating additional reports before an individual could be released from pretrial detention. And while this judicial reporting requirement was passed in Security C, it ultimately was not funded, so it has yet to take effect. Expanding pretrial detention in the district results in more people being held under correctional control, despite evidence that fewer than 1 in 100 people on pretrial release are rearrested for a violent offense. Research shows that pretrial detention can worsen public safety by increasing the likelihood of future criminal legal involvement, and evidence also shows that those detained experience negative consequences, such as a greater likelihood of being convicted and sentenced, lost wages and jobs, and destabilization of families. Next, gun violence is the largest driver of homicides in the district. In 2023, 45% of reported shootings were fatal. Between January 2021 and December 2022, gun homicides made up 85% of all homicides. However, as of May 31st of this year, violent crimes involving a gun are down in 2024 compared to the 2 prior years to date. From January 1st through May 31st, 2024, there were 804 violent crimes involving a gun, compared to 1,173 in 2023 and 952 in 2022 over the same time period. Gun-involved homicides are also down in 2024 over the same periods in 2023 and 2022. Data from the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco shows law enforcement agencies in DC recovered 3,135 guns in 2023, with most being recovered from MPD Districts 6 and 7, which largely correspond to Wards 7 and 8. Many guns are entering DC from surrounding jurisdictions, and of guns successfully traced in 2023, 701 came from Virginia and 298 came from Maryland. Another 534 guns came from Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Additionally, Secure DC included a provision making the unlawful discarding of firearms and ammunition punishable with a sentence up to 5 or 10 years, depending on the convicted person's criminal record. It also added an endangerment with the firearm provision, which criminalizes knowingly discharging a firearm when aware that it creates a substantial risk of bodily harm or death to another person, or in other conditions, including firing a gun in an area open to the public. Next, Secure DC sought to address carjackings, which spiked in 2023. The definition of carjacking was expanded to include not only taking a vehicle from someone who is inside that vehicle by force or violence, but also forcefully taking someone's car keys while they're close to their vehicle in order to steal it. We compiled available carjacking data from MPD to show current carjacking trends to determine whether the definition change affects the number of arrests. This data, illustrated in the graph on your screen, shows rising carjacking incidents roughly coinciding with the onset of the pandemic and peaking in June 2023. Since then, carjackings have sharply decreased. And looking at January through late June 2024, there has been a 43% decline compared to 2023. Importantly, youth have comprised a larger share of carjacking arrests in the district since 2020. Given the research on adolescence and brain development, harsh treatment such as prosecuting youth as adults, even for serious crimes such as carjacking, may not have the positive safety benefits to justify the costs to taxpayers and negative impacts on life outcomes such as employment and lifetime earnings. And if you ride Metro, you may have noticed some of the changes WMATA has made to help reduce fare evasion, such as by installing taller fare gates across its 98 stations. WMATA officials wanted to increase revenue and decrease crime by ensuring riders were paying the proper fare and not turnstile jumping. Secure DC included a provision to further address fare evasion. Now, anyone who is stopped and accused of fare evasion and refuses to provide their true name and address, or knowingly provides a false name and address to an authorized official, could, upon conviction, be fined up to $100. Before Secure DC, officers could issue a citation up to $50 for failing to pay the fare, and Metro Transit Police could only ask an individual to pay their fare or leave the station. And it's also important to note that train fare evasion had already been in March 2024. As of August 2023, there had already been a 70% decrease in fare evasion. Because of the concerns expressed that those who fare evade may commit other crimes on Metro, we conducted a correlation analysis that concluded there was not a statistically significant relationship between fare evasion and serious crime. Recent WMATA data indicates that 2 in 3 Metro bus riders, where most fare evasion happens, have incomes below $50,000, and national studies show how many people evade fares because they struggle to meet basic needs. And I will now pass my virtual mic to Ayushma to talk about drug-free zones.
Thank you, Morgan. For our last Secure DC specific provision, we're going to talk about drug-free zones. Secure DC expanded the ability of MPD to implement drug-free zones, or DFZs, throughout the district by reviving a 1996 law. This allows MPD to create temporary DFZs to disperse groups of 2 or more people from gathering for the purpose of committing certain drug offenses. The chief of police can now designate a temporary DFZ in the shape of a square up to 1,000 feet on each side for up to 5 days. If you take a look at the map on the left, you'll see that those temporary DFZs are represented by red circles. You may be wondering what all those blue circles are. Those are permanent DFZs, which the Controlled Substances Act defines as all areas within 1,000 feet of daycare centers, schools, pools, parks, playgrounds, public housing, and more. Drug offenses which occur within DFZs carry more punitive penalties. Anyone within a DFZ who distributes drugs or possesses with the intent to distribute will be punished by up to double the fine, term of imprisonment, or both. These DFZs are concentrated unevenly throughout the district. Since the passage of Secure DC in March of this year, MPD has steadily created at least 2 new temporary DFZs each week. So if you look at the pink table, you'll see that these DFZs have mostly been established in wards 5, 7, and 8, which is also where the highest population of Black DC residents live. Therefore, Black DC residents are more likely to be subjected to these increased legal penalties, given that they're already more likely to be arrested than their white neighbors for the same illegal drug charges and live in the wards with the highest concentration of DFZs. And although the drug-free zone provisions in Secure DC were designed to address drug activity, Secure DC did not include any provisions related to the treatment of substance use disorders. As shown in the displayed graph, opioid-related deaths have climbed steadily over the past 5 years, accounting for roughly twice as many deaths in the homicide. Yet, during the same period, the annual MPD operating budget is nearly twice that of the Department of Behavioral Health, which provides substance use disorder treatment in the district. Moving on to reentry. As many of you may know, DC does not have its own prison facility for people incarcerated for felony crimes. Instead, individuals serving more than a year of time for DC Code offenses are sent to federal BOP facilities anywhere across the country. In 2023, BOP released 988 people back to DC. And while returning to the community from incarceration poses challenges regardless of where you are held, returning from a distant location does present an additional set of challenges, including maintaining connections with family and community ties, accessing consistent programming across facilities, securing housing, and receiving relevant employment training. On the other hand, research has shown that regular in-person visits from family can reduce recidivism and increase consistent good behavior and post-release success. As shown on the graph, the share of people with felony convictions being sent to prison is rising, instead of maybe being put on probation or short jail sentences followed by community supervision. So this means more members of the DC community will be sent to BOP facilities across the country with varying levels of reentry supports in place. Alongside BOP releases, those incarcerated locally face their own set of challenges. In 2023, DC's DOC released 5,300 plus people back into the community. And according to a 2023 DOC resident survey, 75% of respondents did not have employment. 67% did not feel that they were provided adequate reentry information. 60% did not have transportation, and half of them did not have a place to go. So, what does all of this cost DC? The financial costs of DC's criminal legal system are significant. In 2023, looking at only incarceration and policing, the costs topped $1 billion for the first time. This figure does not even include the costs of courts, pretrial supervision, adult probation, prosecution, or other reentry and justice-related agencies. It also doesn't include capital costs, such as the nearly $500 million DC has put aside for building a new jail. Getting at the root causes of crime and reducing the district's carceral footprint could help reduce these costs and would also allow for investments in other areas of district residents. So we hope this report provides a helpful glimpse into the challenges, developments, responses, and complexities of DC's criminal legal system over the last year. We also hope it provides insight into certain provisions from Secure DC, one of the most significant changes to DC's criminal landscape in many years. We want to lay down a foundation with this report of data points that policymakers, the media, advocates, and residents can all refer back to as the district measures the legislation's impact in future years. Additionally, it is worth noting that there are still significant gaps in the data regarding the criminal and youth legal systems in the district, especially regarding disability, sexuality, gender, and more. While we were able to gather some data between the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests, and publicly accessible information from the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council's expanded Justice Statistical Analysis tool, we really do hope that more data will be made available from various federal and local entities in the future, because without transparency, we cannot have accountability, and we will miss the chance for creative solutions, innovations, and collaborations. Finally, we hope this report has provided you with the tools you need to understand some of the district's most significant data, and we really hope you will use it to engage in conversations about the need for systemic changes and proactive evidence-based policies. The district's Black and low-income communities consistently pay the price when we only rely on increased policing, detention, and incarceration as solutions. So if our shared goal is a safe, healthy, and thriving district, we must all advocate for evidence-driven and data-supported policies that make that district a reality. So please give our report a read in full. But for now, any questions following our presentation, our panel can address. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, but anyone can go ahead and drop any into the Q&A box, and we can get those answered. We can also, if you direct your attention to the chat, I've dropped a link to the full report where you can find it on CCE's website, which includes all of this data, all of these graphics, and all of the good stuff. But please go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A if you have any. Still not seeing any questions. I'll also let everyone know that we have been recording this session and we'll be uploading it to CCE's YouTube page. So if you would like to refer back to this presentation at some point or send it to a colleague, you can please do that. All right, we've got a question. Are the opportunities for community advocates to report back to Councilwoman Pinto's office / the mayor's office on the impact of this bill? Is that our call to action, I guess? Who'd like to tackle that question?
I can maybe do a quick comment, which is that, the first of the year, we start to have the oversight hearings, and those are really an excellent opportunity to bring up issues with the council around various policies that have been passed, and also to they often will share additional data, the different agencies. So I would say that that is an excellent opportunity. I think working, with your AMCs and also just as a private individual, you can request to meet with council staff if you have questions or concerns. So, we do hope that this will be helpful as you engage with the different policymakers in the district about issues of concern.
Thank you, Tracy. Next question. Has MPD and or council provided any reasonable justification for why so many hours of overtime are paid for annually?
I can tackle that. So there are relatively new reporting requirements for MPD to report on overtime hours. It's not quite quarterly. It seems to be like random periods that range from a month and a half to 3 months that they submit these reports. And in those reports, there is a breakdown of how the overtime hours were spent. And a lot of that is like security. Sometimes they say for protests monitoring. So they do break that down a little bit, but those reports I think are very hard to parse for an average person. So if you're interested, I would direct you to those pages. They're also cited in our report.
Thank you, Katie. All right, next up, is COVID expected to be designated as an outlier with the statistics?
I guess I would just say that nationally, it certainly has. But across the country, there was a spike in violent crime and homicides that occurred during the pandemic. And across the country, we've fortunately begun to see these fall. So, in terms of how it gets addressed, I think crime and victimization rises and falls, right? And it really has very little to do with incarceration, research has shown. But, definitely we see we are really glad to see that the issues around COVID and violent crime in the district appear to be starting to abate. I would say that, one of the concerns that remains is that, as many folks know, youth in the district have been continuing to suffer from the after effects of COVID, including related to school and education issues and emotional support needs. And so I think if we want to see continued improvement, we want to make sure that those issues continue to be addressed and taken, as seriously as they are, not just in terms of, obviously in terms of the well-being of youth, but the possible impact of these on the justice system here in the district.
Thank you, Tracy. Next question, do we have any data that compares victimization reports to arrests, incarceration, and other criminalization data points?
I can answer that question. So by victimization reports, I'm not sure exactly what you are referring to. I think because a lot of crime is unreported, what really you can use is like police reports to measure the amount of reported crime. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of great data about like demographics of people who are survivors of crime. And so you really just have to rely on what has been reported to the police. I think if you're looking for trying to connect reported crimes to subsequent arrests, I think looking at like the murder clearance rate is probably a good way to do that, because for the most part, murders are going to have been reported. And then, right, the clearance rate is going to show you the murders that someone has then been subsequently incarcerated for. But for a lot of crimes, we know that they are very underreported to the police, especially like sexual violence. So there's not always a great way to track, right, the number of people who might have been victimized and the subsequent outcome of potential incarceration.
Thank you, Magdalena. All right, next question. Did we send this report to City Council? I'm getting a thumbs up from Tracy.
Yes, we did. It went to all of City Council. It went to the Mayor's Deputy Director of Public Safety. And just one more comment, and I think I may have put it in the DC Council did pass legislation requiring the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council to conduct a victimization survey This has not been implemented yet, but for those who sort of work in this area, you know that there's an imperfect connection between victimization and reported crime because many victims don't report crimes to the police. And, you know, we are looking forward to CJCC conducting this report so that we can understand issues, especially around non-reported victimization in the district.
Thank you. And the last question we've got in the chat so far is, do we have any more information available on the reentry piece? Where's this data coming from?
So I can talk a little bit about the reentry data. I don't know if you want to go to the reentry slides, we can have it up. But I pulled some data from BOP. They published numbers about how many folks are getting released home. Similar to the Department of Corrections, they put up, like facts and figures and, information every so often. Which I believe when we were putting together this report, the last one we used was April, but they may have since published newer information. And they also, for the resident survey numbers, they publish the results of these surveys. So all of this is available online. And if you go through the official longer version of the report from this PowerPoint, everything is cited and linked. So if you want to go take a look at these numbers for yourself, then everything is all there in the report as well.
And just to tag on the share of DC felony sentences resulting in a prison sentence is from the DC Sentencing Commission report. We have pages and pages of footnotes for folks who really want to dig in.
Thank you for that answer. And then we've got a question from Mariah Francis. We know that DC is facing a polysubstance overdose epidemic due to the lack of regulation and public health approaches to drug use. Are there opportunities for organizations working on the front lines of the overdose epidemic to partner with CCE? Do we share data on drug possession related arrests? Would love to partner.
I would say let's talk offline. I mean, I think we are definitely concerned about the focus on enforcement in terms of drug-related overdose and use. And we've seen that in the past that a focus on arrest is not necessarily the most effective way to address overdose. So this is something that definitely we hoped to highlight in here and thinking about solutions, we'd love to be part of the conversation.
Those are all of the questions that we have, but thank you again to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for your time and thoughtful presentation of this, lots of data points here. So thank you to everyone for coming. A reminder that there is a link in the chat to the full report where you can see all of this information and more, as well as how to contact CCE. So thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.